At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, First Lieutenant Lyle Boo crouched inside a frozen foxhole atop Lanzerath Ridge in Belgium. Below him, through the morning mist and drifting snow, he watched approximately 500 German paratroopers emerging from the forest and forming into assault elements. He was 20 years old. He had only been in combat for 3 months. No reinforcements were on the way. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had been assigned a clear mission: break through the Losheim Gap so that the 1st SS Panzer Division could advance behind them. 90 minutes earlier, the first day of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge had begun, with over 1,600 German artillery guns firing across an 80-mile front. Bau's position was the only American defensive element protecting the critical road junction at Lanzerath. Behind his 18-man intelligence and reconnaissance platoon stretched open roads leading directly toward Allied supply depots and command centers. The front line of the 99th Infantry Division had been stretched dangerously thin. Bau's reconnaissance unit had been ordered to hold a 5-mile sector, normally assigned to an entire battalion. There were no reserves. The closest American unit was 6 miles away. Bau immediately understood the arithmetic. His platoon was equipped with standard infantry weapons: M1 Garand rifles, 1 Browning automatic rifle per squad, and a single .30 caliber M1919 machine gun. They faced 500 elite German paratroopers advancing in formation through snow-covered fields. On paper, the outcome was obvious. German intelligence had concluded that American troops would retreat without armor or air support. Wehrmacht planners expected to break through this sector in less than 2 hours and reach the Meuse River by nightfall. The 99th Division had only arrived in the Ardennes a month earlier. Many of its soldiers lacked combat experience. Earlier in December, the division had suffered limited casualties during patrol operations: 47 killed. Commanders feared what would happen if a full-scale German assault materialized. Every man in Boo's platoon understood what typically happened to reconnaissance units that were overrun. Bou radioed regimental headquarters and requested permission to withdraw to more defensible terrain. The answer came quickly: hold your position. Reinforcements from 3rd Battalion are on the way. Bou knew the truth. Reinforcements would not arrive in time. German forces had already cut communication lines across much of the sector. His SCR-300 radio provided the only link to higher command. 4 days earlier, Bau had made a decision outside standard procedure. He had traded captured German identification cards to the regimental ordnance officer in exchange for an armored jeep mounting a Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun. The M2 fired 12.7 millimeter rounds at roughly 550 rounds per minute. Its effective range exceeded 1,800 meters. It could penetrate light armor and devastate infantry in open terrain. Bou positioned the jeep at the center of his defensive line behind 9 foxholes dug into the hillside. That single weapon would determine whether 18 men could delay 500 long enough to disrupt the opening hours of Germany's last great offensive. At 6:45 a.m., the German artillery barrage ceased. Through thinning fog, Bou watched the Fallschirmjäger assembling assault waves at the base of the ridge. He checked his watch. The first attack would begin within minutes. He gave one order to his men: hold fire until 75 yards. At 7 a.m., the lead elements of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment began advancing uphill toward Lanzerath Ridge. 500 German paratroopers moved forward in 3 separate assault waves. Each wave consisted of roughly 170 men advancing in loose formation through knee-deep snow. Their objective was simple: overrun the thin American screen and clear the road junction for the armored division behind them. The first wave reached the barbed wire fence 75 yards from Beau's foxholes. At 7:15, Beau gave the order. The Jeep-mounted Browning M2 opened fire. The gunner had carefully mapped his fields of fire the previous night. The .50 caliber rounds tore into the lead German formation at nearly 2,800 feet per second. Each projectile carried enough energy to penetrate steel helmets and even light armor at distance. At 75 yards, the effect was devastating. The first burst cut down 11 paratroopers in seconds. The survivors dove for cover behind the wire obstacle. Simultaneously, Beau's riflemen began firing their M1 Garands. The intelligence and reconnaissance platoon had been chosen for its marksmanship. Every soldier had qualified as an expert. Unlike standard infantry units that often fired in volleys, Beau's men selected individual targets and delivered precise shots. German soldiers attempting to cut through the barbed wire were prioritized. After 8 minutes of sustained fire, the first assault wave withdrew. Beau counted 23 bodies scattered between the fence and the tree line. The Germans had expected light resistance. Instead, they encountered disciplined rifle fire supported by a heavy machine gun positioned in fortified foxholes. At 7:45, the second assault began. This time, German paratroopers adapted. Small squads provided covering fire, while other teams attempted to flank the American position through wooded areas on both sides of the ridge. Beau repositioned his Browning automatic rifle teams to defend the flanks. The M2 continued firing at targets crossing the open field. 4 forward artillery observers attached to Beau's platoon attempted to call in supporting fire from the 371 Field Artillery Battalion. Coordinates were transmitted for a barrage targeting German assembly points at the base of the ridge. No artillery arrived. Across the Ardennes front, American batteries were overwhelmed, responding to large-scale German attacks. Entire regiments were under pressure. Beau's isolated platoon would receive no indirect support. The second assault lasted 19 minutes. German MG-42 machine guns established positions along the tree line and began suppressing the foxholes with sustained fire at rates exceeding 1,200 rounds per minute. American soldiers recognized the sound instantly. The weapon earned the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. But the Germans could not advance, while the M2 continued firing. Every attempt to cross the exposed snowfield resulted in immediate casualties. The open terrain offered no concealment. At 8:04, the second assault wave withdrew. Beau assessed ammunition. His men had already fired approximately 400 rifle rounds. Each soldier had begun the battle carrying roughly 80 rounds. At this rate, they would be out of ammunition before noon. The M2 had expended 200 of its initial 550 rounds. The barrel temperature was climbing rapidly. The Germans paused for 37 minutes. During that time, Beau observed enemy troops gathering in 3 distinct areas near the base of the ridge. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was preparing a coordinated attack from multiple directions. His platoon of 18 would now face simultaneous assaults on front and flanks. At 8:41 a.m., the third assault began. Approximately 350 paratroopers advanced. German doctrine emphasized overwhelming force at decisive points. Officers expected to crush the American line within minutes. Boo's bar teams engaged the flanking elements in the woods. The bar, firing .30 caliber rounds from 20-round magazines, provided effective suppressive fire, but required frequent reloading. The M2 shifted to short, controlled bursts to preserve barrel life, 3-round bursts every few seconds. The reduced rate improved accuracy while conserving ammunition. At 9 a.m., German mortar teams entered the fight. 8-centimeter mortar rounds began impacting around the American foxholes. Explosions forced riflemen to take cover, reducing their rate of accurate fire. Though many shells detonated harmlessly in frozen ground, the psychological pressure increased. The Germans had finally introduced indirect fire. Boo's observers attempted again to call for American counter-battery fire. The request was acknowledged, but denied. Across the Ardennes, over 400,000 German troops were engaged in the offensive. Boo's 18-man position represented a minor point in a massive campaign. No artillery would come. On the eastern flank, German paratroopers advanced to within 40 yards of the foxholes before being stopped by concentrated BAR fire. Private First Class William James emptied 3 magazines in rapid succession, dropping multiple attackers. The flanking force withdrew at 9:17. In the open field, the main assault stalled again at the barbed wire. The M2 maintained its deadly zone of fire. By this point, the gunner estimated he had fired over 420 rounds. Only about 130 remained. If firing continued at the current pace, the M2 would fall silent before 11 a.m. The third assault wave finally withdrew at 9:43 after more than an hour of sustained combat. Boo counted 41 visible German casualties in the snow. But the math remained brutal. Nearly 900 rifle rounds had been fired. Each soldier now had fewer than 30 rounds left. The next German assault would likely be the last they could meaningfully resist. Through his binoculars, Bau saw German officers regrouping for another attack. At 10:17 a.m., the fourth German assault began. The regimental commander abandoned flanking maneuvers and reorganized his battalion into a single concentrated wave. Nearly 400 paratroopers advanced simultaneously across the full width of the snow-covered ridge. The tactic relied on overwhelming numbers rather than maneuver. Bo watched through binoculars as the formation stretched roughly 200 yards across the field. Soldiers maintained wider spacing to reduce vulnerability to machine gun fire. Smoke grenades created shifting screens of concealment as the Germans advanced with discipline and coordination. They had learned from the previous failures. The M2 opened fire at 150 yards. The gunner targeted the outer edges of the formation first, attempting to compress the attackers toward the center, where rifle fire would be most effective. .50 caliber rounds tore through smoke and snow alike, striking soldiers who believed they were concealed. But the barrel temperature had reached critical levels. After firing 60 additional rounds, accuracy began to degrade. The weapon still functioned, but dispersion increased. Bau's riflemen engaged at 100 yards. 16 men firing M1 Garands in semi-automatic mode could deliver well over 100 accurate shots per minute. Unlike earlier waves, this phase of the battle relied less on the machine gun and more on disciplined marksmanship. The Germans reached the barbed wire at 10:29. Teams carrying wire cutters advanced under covering fire from MG-42 machine guns at the tree line. For the first time, several German squads successfully breached the obstacle. 3 openings were cut through the fence. The assault wave surged forward. At 10:32, the M2 fired its final belt. The jeep-mounted machine gun fell silent. The effect was immediate. German paratroopers who had spent 3 hours under relentless heavy fire recognized the shift. Their rate of advance increased sharply. Bau ordered bayonets fixed. The attackers closed to within 50 yards. Individual German soldiers could now be seen clearly. Faces flushed from exertion, submachine guns raised, some carrying stick grenades. The battle transitioned from long-range engagement to close combat preparation. At 10:38, several American riflemen reported empty clips. The distinctive metallic ping of ejected en-bloc clips echoed across the line. Approximately 1,200 rifle rounds had been expended in 4 hours. Less than 200 rounds remained across the entire platoon. Some soldiers held 5 rounds, others had 15. No one possessed enough ammunition to sustain defense much longer. Forward artillery observers made another attempt to call in fire support. Again, the request was acknowledged and denied. Every available American artillery piece was engaged elsewhere. At 10:45, the 4th assault reached maximum intensity. 400 paratroopers pressed against positions defended by 18 Americans with fewer than 200 rifle rounds remaining. The M2 sat motionless on its mount, barrel discolored from heat. Bou calculated the timeline. Perhaps 10 more minutes before ammunition ran out completely. German losses now exceeded 90 men killed or wounded. But the attackers still outnumbered the defenders by more than 20-1. Behind the infantry, the 1st SS Panzer Division waited for the road to be cleared. Hundreds of vehicles and over 100 tanks stood ready to exploit a breakthrough. Everything hinged on this ridge. At 10:53, German troops breached the defensive perimeter on the eastern flank. A squad of 12 paratroopers slipped between 2 foxholes where ammunition had run out first. The American defenders there resorted to grenades and entrenching tools. Hand-to-hand combat erupted. Bou redirected 3 riflemen from the center to contain the breach. These men still had ammunition. At near point-blank range, they fired into the advancing Germans. 7 paratroopers fell. The survivors withdrew temporarily. But the breach revealed the truth. Once ammunition was gone, the ridge would fall. The 4th assault finally receded at 11:21. For a moment, silence returned. Bou conducted an ammunition count. The result was devastating. 73 rifle rounds remained across the entire position. The M2 was empty. 22 Americans, including artillery observers, held the most critical road junction in the northern sector of the Ardennes, with 73 bullets. The temperature hovered near 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow continued to fall. The men had been fighting since before dawn without food or water. Several soldiers showed signs of frostbite. 1 observer had been killed. 14 others were wounded, but still fighting. At 11:45, Bou observed German officers gathering additional troops at the tree line. Fresh paratroopers were being brought forward. A 5th assault was forming. He radioed headquarters again. The answer did not change. "Hold your position. Do not withdraw. By 12:15 p.m., Boo watched through his field glasses as fresh German troops assembled at the base of Lanzerath Ridge. The fifth assault would involve rested companies that had not taken part in the previous attacks. His platoon now had 73 rounds of rifle ammunition total. The arithmetic was merciless. Approximately 400 paratroopers were preparing to advance against 18 defenders with barely enough ammunition for a few minutes of sustained fire. Boo redistributed the remaining rounds. Soldiers with proven marksmanship received priority. Those without ammunition were instructed to retrieve weapons or bandoliers from wounded comrades if possible. The plan was simple: fire until the last round, then fight with bayonets and grenades. The fifth assault began at 12:37. The German formation moved faster than before, spacing reduced in favor of speed. Officers believed they faced a weakened but still reinforced American position. They had no idea that the defenders were nearly out of ammunition. Boo ordered his men to hold fire until 60 yards. At that distance, every shot had to count. The first volley dropped 11 paratroopers. The Germans immediately went prone and began returning fire with rifles and MG-42s. Without the suppressive effect of the M2, however, Boo's men could not halt the advance across the field as effectively. Squad by squad, the paratroopers advanced using fire and maneuver techniques. Snow and smoke provided partial concealment as they pushed forward. At 12:51, 3 German soldiers reached a foxhole on the western flank where its occupants had expended their final rounds. The Americans fought with entrenching tools and bare hands. One paratrooper fell with a crushed skull. The others withdrew after suffering knife wounds. The Germans were now within grenade range of multiple positions. Boo counted his own remaining rounds, 16. Around the perimeter, other men reported similar numbers. The forward artillery observers continued transmitting coordinates, as if repetition might somehow produce fire support. None came. At 1 p.m., the German assault intensified. 4 separate gaps had been cut through the wire barrier. Assault teams of 3 to 5 men advanced under cover of smoke. Boo's men fired carefully. Every bullet struck or wounded a target. But 73 rounds divided among hundreds of attackers could not alter the larger equation. At 1:14, Private First Class William James fired his final round. The sharp metallic ping of the empty clip signaled the moment. One by one, other rifles fell silent. By 1:17, Boo had fired his last cartridge. Only scattered rounds remained in a few foxholes. For the first time in nearly 7 hours of continuous combat, American defensive fire weakened to isolated single shots. German officers recognized the shift immediately. They ordered a general advance. At 1:20 p.m., roughly 50 paratroopers surged forward simultaneously from multiple directions. The defenders threw their final grenades. Several Germans fell, but the attackers closed to within 20 yards. Bayonets were fixed. Entrenching tools were raised. The battle became personal. The Wehrmacht had suffered 92 casualties attacking this ridge. The surviving paratroopers were unlikely to show mercy to defenders who had inflicted such losses. At 1:23 p.m., the climax came. German troops rushed the first American foxholes. Hand-to-hand combat erupted. In one position, 3 paratroopers leapt into a trench occupied by 2 American soldiers. 8 seconds of brutal fighting followed. One German fell to a bayonet thrust. The Americans were wounded but still resisting when an officer ordered them at gunpoint to surrender. Additional German troops flooded through the breach. Boe evaluated the situation instantly. Continuing resistance without ammunition would only result in needless deaths. He gave the order to cease fire and surrender. At 1:32 p.m., 18 members of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon and 4 artillery observers laid down their weapons. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge had lasted 7 hours and 57 minutes. 92 German paratroopers lay killed or wounded across the snow. Only 1 American had been killed. 14 were wounded. The German soldiers who secured the position expressed disbelief at the size of the defending force. One paratrooper examined the silent M2 and asked Boe how many heavy machine guns the Americans had used. When Boe answered that there had been only 1, the German refused to believe it. Their doctrine assumed overlapping heavy weapons and ammunition resupply. The idea that a single-point .50 caliber machine gun, operated by exhausted soldiers, had produced such defensive impact contradicted their expectations. At 2 p.m., the German battalion commander arrived. He ordered medical treatment for wounded Americans and Germans alike. Boe and his men were prepared for transport to prisoner of war facilities. The ridge was finally in German hands, but the consequences of those 7 hours were only beginning. The immediate tactical outcome appeared clear. The Germans had captured Lanzerath Ridge. Boe's platoon had been taken prisoner. The road junction was technically open, but the operational picture told a different story. The infantry regiment tasked with clearing the route had required nearly 8 hours to defeat 18 defenders. In the German plan for the Ardennes offensive, timing was everything. Armored spearheads were scheduled to pass through Lanzerath at 8 a.m. on December 16th. Instead, they would not arrive until midnight on December 17th. Behind the Fallschirmjäger, the lead element of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Kampfgruppe Piper, waited with nearly 5,000 men, over 600 vehicles, and more than 100 tanks. Their objective was the Meuse River, 60 miles west, by nightfall on the first day of the offensive. That schedule was now impossible. The delay at Lanzerath Ridge cascaded through the entire northern wing of the German advance. Units meant to exploit a breakthrough were forced to halt, reorganize, and reconnoiter terrain they believed contained stronger American forces than actually existed. German commanders, having suffered 92 casualties attacking what they assumed was a reinforced American company, believed the woods beyond the ridge concealed additional troops and armor. They moved cautiously. That caution cost time. Instead of advancing 60 miles on the first day, the northern spearhead advanced less than 10. By late afternoon on December 16th, Boe and his wounded men began the march into captivity. They did not know the broader consequences of their stand. From their perspective, they had been overrun once their ammunition ran out. They believed they had failed. 2 days after the battle, 72 American prisoners were forced into a single cattle car, designed for 40 men. The train moved east into Germany without food or water. Temperatures dropped below freezing inside the sealed car. By Christmas Day, 7 prisoners in Boe's car had died from wounds, dehydration, or exposure. The survivors were distributed to prisoner of war camps, including Nuremberg, Hammelburg, and Moosburg. Boe spent 5 months in captivity. Conditions worsened as Germany's military situation deteriorated in early 1945. Rations shrank to thin soup once daily. Allied bombing raids struck rail lines and supply depots near the camps. Guards grew harsher as defeat became inevitable. Disease spread: hepatitis, dysentery, pneumonia. When American forces liberated the camps in April 1945, Bowe weighed 112 pounds. He had weighed 165 pounds before the battle. The men of the reconnaissance platoon returned home, believing they had been captured after exhausting their ammunition. They did not know that their resistance had delayed the 1st SS Panzer Division by 16 crucial hours. They did not know that the northern thrust of the German offensive had fallen behind schedule on the very first day, because of 18 soldiers on a frozen ridge. After the war, the platoon dispersed across the United States. Lanzerath Ridge faded into obscurity. The Battle of the Bulge became associated with larger engagements: Bastogne, the Malmedy Massacre, armored clashes in deep snow. An 18-man reconnaissance platoon holding a ridge for nearly 8 hours did not capture headlines. In 1965, the U.S. Army published a multi-volume official history titled The Ardennes, The Battle of the Bulge. The defense of Lanzerath was mentioned only briefly. Private First Class William James, who had fought on the ridge, read the account and was troubled by the lack of recognition. He contacted Bowe and encouraged him to pursue formal acknowledgement for the platoon. Bowe began writing letters to former commanders, including Major General Walter Lauer, requesting review of the action. In 1966, Bowe received a Silver Star in the mail. He refused to accept it. He insisted that the entire platoon had fought as one unit and deserved collective recognition. Thus began a 15-year effort to correct the historical record. The campaign involved correspondence with members of Congress, interviews with historians, and renewed examination of operational records. Author John Eisenhower later documented the battle in his book, The Bitter Woods. National columnists wrote about the overlooked platoon. Gradually, the scale of what had occurred at Lanzerath became clearer. 18 men, supported by a single jeep-mounted machine gun, had stopped 500 paratroopers for nearly 8 hours and delayed a full SS Panzer Division during the critical opening day of Germany's final offensive in the West. The story was no longer a footnote. It was a case study in tactical delay and disciplined defense. The campaign for recognition stretched across 15 years. Bowe refused to let the matter fade. He gathered sworn statements from surviving members of the platoon. He reconstructed timelines, compared German casualty reports, and reviewed operational maps from December 16, 1944. What had once seemed like a small defensive action was revealed, through documentation, as a decisive delay in the opening phase of the German offensive. Congressional hearings examined the case. Military historians reevaluated the original battlefield reports. The numbers were consistent. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had suffered 92 casualties attacking Lanzerath Ridge. The German timetable had been disrupted. The armored thrust behind the infantry had lost a full day of momentum. Momentum, in offensive warfare, is everything. Without it, even superior forces struggle to exploit breakthroughs. On October 26, 1981, 37 years after the battle, the United States Army formally recognized the actions of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. 4 members, including Bowe, received the Distinguished Service Cross. 5 were awarded Silver Stars. 10 received Bronze Stars with V devices for valor. The entire platoon received the Presidential Unit Citation. By official record, the Lanzerath Ridge Platoon became the most decorated American unit of its size for a single engagement during World War II. Not all the men lived to see the recognition. William James, who had initiated the effort to restore the platoon's legacy, died in 1977 after enduring dozens of surgeries to treat wounds sustained during the battle. He never saw the medals awarded. But the surviving members understood at last that they had not failed. They had delayed an armored division. They had absorbed and repelled repeated assaults by elite airborne troops. They had altered the tempo of an offensive that relied on speed above all else. Military analysis later emphasized the cumulative effect of small unit resistance during the first day of the Battle of the Bulge. German planning depended on precise timing across multiple axes of advance. Delays at key junctions, like Lanzerath, forced armored units to navigate congested roads, frozen terrain, and unanticipated American reinforcement. Instead of reaching the Meuse River in days, the German offensive stalled. Allied reserves mobilized. Air support returned once weather cleared. The window of opportunity closed. Lanzerath Ridge was not the only factor in the German failure, but it was one of the first. The platoon's stand demonstrated how disciplined fire control, intelligent positioning, and psychological pressure could amplify the defensive power of a numerically inferior force. Bowe himself rarely described the battle in dramatic terms. He emphasized preparation. He emphasized the value of holding fire until effective range. He emphasized the importance of a single heavy weapon placed correctly. He noted that the M2's psychological impact likely exceeded its physical destruction. German soldiers, accustomed to calculating risk based on weapon density, assumed multiple heavy machine guns were present. That assumption slowed assaults, forced regrouping, and magnified delay. After the war, Bowe returned to civilian life. He did not seek fame. He did not write memoirs centered on personal heroism. Instead, he maintained correspondence with former platoon members and quietly ensured that the historical record reflected what had occurred. The men of the platoon had entered the battle believing they were a thin, screening force. They emerged from captivity, understanding that sometimes holding ground for hours can change events far beyond the immediate battlefield. History often remembers grand maneuvers, armored thrusts, massive artillery barrages, strategic decisions at high command levels. But war is frequently shaped by smaller moments. 18 men in frozen foxholes, 73 rounds of ammunition, 1 jeep-mounted machine gun, 7 hours and 57 minutes. That was enough. Military historians later dissected the engagement at Lanzerath Ridge in operational detail. The German plan for the Ardennes offensive relied on speed, surprise, and uninterrupted forward momentum. Infantry units were tasked with clearing road junctions rapidly, so armored columns could exploit breakthroughs before Allied forces could react. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had been expected to neutralize Bowe's position within 2 hours. Instead, it required nearly 8. That delay forced the 1st SS Panzer Division to halt. Fuel consumption increased as vehicles idled. Supply columns became congested. Communications faltered in the confusion of snow, narrow roads, and incomplete intelligence. German commanders at the ridge believed they had encountered a reinforced American company supported by multiple heavy weapons. Reports upward through the chain of command reflected that assumption. In reality, the defense had consisted of 18 reconnaissance soldiers, 4 artillery observers, and a single jeep-mounted M2 machine gun. The disparity between perception and reality magnified the tactical effect of the defense. German assault doctrine emphasized shock and momentum. Repeated repulses damaged confidence and forced commanders to reconsider assumptions about American strength in the sector. Each regrouping cost precious minutes. Each casualty report compounded caution. The broader Battle of the Bulge involved over 400,000 German troops attacking along an 80-mile front. Success required synchronized advances across multiple sectors. When timing failed in one critical location, the entire offensive began to fragment. Bow and his men never saw that fragmentation unfold. In prisoner of war camps, survival became the focus. Food was scarce. Medical treatment was limited. Winter conditions inside overcrowded facilities worsened existing wounds. Many prisoners developed illness as their bodies weakened. Liberation in April 1945 came as both relief and shock. The physical cost of captivity was visible. Bow had lost over 50 pounds. Others bore permanent injuries from frostbite, malnutrition, or untreated wounds. Yet even after returning home, few outside the unit understood what had happened at Lanzerath. The battle had not produced dramatic images of tanks clashing or cities burning. It had been a static defense on a frozen hillside, no sweeping maneuvers, no sweeping headlines. For decades, it remained overshadowed by larger engagements. But among those who study small unit tactics, Lanzerath became a case study in economy of force. The platoon had been ordered to hold. They had done so with disciplined fire control, intelligent use of terrain, and psychological pressure applied through a single heavy weapon. The lesson was not about heroics. It was about delay. In modern warfare, delay can be decisive. Time allows reinforcement. Time permits reorganization. Time disrupts enemy coordination. 7 hours and 57 minutes at Lanzerath Ridge bought time. That time, multiplied across the front, contributed to the eventual failure of Germany's last major offensive in the West. Bow himself summarized the battle in practical terms. He once remarked that they had simply done what they were ordered to do: hold position until they could not hold any longer. The difference was that they held far longer than anyone expected. And in war, expectations often determine outcomes. The recognition ceremony in 1981 closed a chapter that had remained unfinished for nearly 4 decades. For the surviving members of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, the medals were not about personal glory. They were confirmation that what had happened on December 16, 1944, mattered beyond the snow-covered ridge where it occurred. Lanzerath Ridge became an example taught in military academies and officer training programs. The engagement demonstrated how terrain, disciplined fire control, and psychological dominance could offset overwhelming numerical disadvantage. 18 defenders had faced 500 attackers. They had held for nearly 8 hours. They had inflicted 92 casualties, while suffering 1 killed and 14 wounded. They had done so with limited ammunition, no artillery support, and no expectation of reinforcement. The armored jeep with the Browning M2 became symbolic of improvisation under pressure. The weapon itself was not unique. The placement and disciplined use of it were. Bau's decision to delay withdrawal and maintain maximum fire during the fourth assault had altered German perceptions of American strength on the ridge. That perception slowed operational tempo. In warfare, perception often carries as much weight as firepower. The German commanders believed they were fighting a reinforced company. They were not. They were fighting a platoon that understood how to multiply its apparent strength. After the war, Bou lived quietly. He did not portray himself as a hero. He described the battle as a matter of duty. His focus remained on ensuring his men were remembered properly. The broader narrative of the Battle of the Bulge continued to center on Bastogne and armored clashes deeper in the Ardennes. But in military circles, Lanzerath gained recognition as one of the most effective small-unit defensive actions of the war. The battle proved something fundamental. Technology and numbers matter, but so do discipline, positioning, and the ability to control fire under pressure. When the German paratroopers finally overran the ridge, they had already lost the operational advantage they sought. The delay had disrupted their timetable and contributed to the slowing of the northern advance. The stand at Lanzerath did not win the Battle of the Bulge alone, but it helped prevent the rapid breakthrough that German planners had counted on. For years, the men believed their capture signified failure. History eventually corrected that belief. Their defense became one of the most decorated platoon-level actions in American military history. 18 soldiers, 1 jeep-mounted machine gun, 73 remaining rounds at the end, 7 hours, and 57 minutes of resistance. Sometimes wars turn not on massive offensives, but on small groups who refuse to break when mathematics says they should. Lanzerath Ridge was one of those moments.